Hey moms, it's Nakimi. Welcome to the channel and space for single moms navigating motherhood. And as always, we do not bash the baby daddies because, well, we are here now. So I want to do a pulse check on mental health today. You guys know I talk a lot about mental health, therapy. I am a huge advocate of single mothers' mental health. And I want to kind of give my take on why I feel that every single mom should be in therapy. You know, I can remember a time back in the day where, mental health, especially in the Black community, just wasn't discussed. Those that were battling a serious mental illness, the old people would say they were touched in the head, or, postpartum depression was labeled as baby blues. A child that's, exhibiting ADHD symptoms or behaviors that would be like, oh, they're bad or unruly, just got ants in your pants, you need to get somewhere and sit down, So, of course, mental health is nothing new, but, I guess depending on your socioeconomic status, a lot of them didn't have access to resources for mental health or even know that they were struggling with mental health, right? So now you have, generations that are experiencing trauma, PTSD, anxiety, depression, and whatever else. They're just passing it on down to the next generation and then so forth. We talk about generational curses. So we've got to break those, And you don't have to be struggling to get into therapy. Maybe there's no issues with, the other parent. Maybe you're financially okay, but maybe your job, you're experiencing microaggressions at your job. Get into therapy, But for my young single mothers that your support system is pretty scarce, you really need therapy, right? Because with this economy alone will drive anybody insane. The rent prices are borderline criminal. If you ask me, don't try to finance a new car. You'll walk off that lot paying $800 for a basic edition compact car. It's ridiculous. Groceries, everything is just expensive. The cost of living is expensive. Hell, it's even expensive to breathe at this moment, to just exist, straight up. But get into therapy. If you are a single mom that feel like, everything is closing in on you, or, you feel like you're circling the drain, baby, get into therapy. Go talk to someone. See about your mental health, right? Because it's always a blessing to have, an inner circle where you can share and confide in and vent when you need to. But that's not going to help you heal what needs to be healed. And oftentimes, especially if you are a mom that is not always emotional available to your kids, like you yell a lot, your patience is very short. You need to get into therapy, because when you think back to your childhood, really sit back and think, what was your environment like growing up? Did you have both parents? If you didn't, was the parent that you with, were they emotionally available for you? Did they yell? Growing up in the Black community especially, and I know this happens to all communities, but just specifically talking to my community today, we grew up with, go get that belt, I'm going to beat your butt, or a switch, and I'm an 80s baby. A shoe, anything they could pick up. It was a lot, the grandmothers yelled sometimes, Jimmy, y'all don't sit y'all. They're running in and out of my house, and we laugh at it now, but in all reality, we need to start taking a look back at that, because as a child, when you're in an environment where emotions are high and, you got a parent that's stressed out and you don't really know if one day they're going to wake up in a good mood, you learned how to scan the room. So when you get older, that's things that you also learn to do. You learn to scan the room. And so I feel like oftentimes with Black adults, I notice, and this isn't a one size fit all, so this is not all Black people, right? Nothing in life is a one size fit all, right? But I noticed that we're a little closed off to one another until we get to know each other. Like, we're not just going to walk up and be like, hey, so where do you live? Oh, yeah, we just typically don't do it. You go to work and, you got to kind of feel people out first, which isn't a bad thing. But I'm just saying those are some of the characteristics of, why we do that, for sure. And if you are having issues with the other parent and your co-parenting situation is not healthy at this moment, well, we know that that's an extra added level of stress, right? I know it's easy to get on your phone and talk to your friends and vent about what's going on, but baby, they can't help you. Not the type of help that you need. We're talking about getting you to the next level. We're talking about having you take your life back, calling your power back and your energy back. You got to get in offense mode. You got to call them shots. And it's so hard to do when you're struggling and everything kind of falls on you. That can be a lot on a day-to-day basis. It's like you're in autopilot mode. That has a deleterious impact on your mental health, whether we want to admit it or not. You could be experiencing, symptoms of anxiety or depression. If you're always kind of just worried about what's coming next, or, you're afraid to make a move, because you don't know what's going on. Like, he didn't give us a spirit of fear, but of sound mind and power of love. Your nervous system is in a frenzy and you need to calm it. Yep, get into therapy for sure. Get into therapy. Those therapists, oftentimes, they've gone through things, right? They've had life experiences. And I know that, we kind of, well, me in my generation kind of grew up with the pray it away. But we've got to cut that out because God gave us resources. And most importantly, he gave us each other. We all have gifts. Those therapists, they took the time to go to school. They have a passion for helping those that are struggling mentally. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean that you're odd or you're not quite like everybody else or there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with everybody. Everybody needs therapy right about now, right? Life is lifing. That's just a fact. And a lot of people have woken up from the American dream and don't really want to work. So you're not the only one if you're feeling like you're tired of getting up, going to that job just to pay bills, right? Nobody wants to do that. People want financial freedom and the flexibility to just live. The food that we're eating, the quality isn't quite matching the prices. It's a lot. And then groceries is high as heck. Don't be in a situation where you are a working single mom and you don't qualify for any type of subsidized programs. Oh, Lord, you might have to get you 2 jobs. Girl, that's hard. Go get into therapy, and we live in hustle culture. Everybody's hustling to get the bag. You see it on social media. Everybody's trying to look like they got it going on. Behind closed doors, child, they're sliding down walls. Life is dragging us all right about now. So you're not alone, And the best thing about it, nobody has to know that you're going to therapy but you, right? Your therapists are not going to go telling your business. They do, their butts are going to get sued, Yeah, get into therapy. Go talk to someone, so they can help you sort out your issues and help you to look at things and provide you a different way of thinking and handling things, because you have a right to be angry, especially if, you're doing it by yourself and you didn't make that baby by yourself, but you can't control anyone else. All you can do is control you, because if it's a situation where the other parent is not there and you can't make him do what he doesn't want to do, right? He's a grown-ass adult, right? Then you are the one that's nurturing your child. How are you going to pour into your child or your children if you're running on empty? Like, it just doesn't work that way. And you can't dress it up with the bow and buy them all the latest gadgets and sneakers and think, oh, they're good. Nope. You got to be emotionally there for your children. You got to be in tune. You got to fall in love with motherhood so that you can become the best mom that you can be. And, therapy, when you get your mind right and you're a healthy, active, functioning adult, that is so good for your kids because they have an example of that. You don't have to be superwoman and do it all by yourself. You don't have to be strong anymore. You need help, open up your mouth and go to a therapist and tell them about what is bothering you. Get yourself the help you need, babe. Get yourself the help you need. Yep. I'm going to keep saying it. Get into therapy for sure. And I've been marinating with this video, but let me cook for just a second. I know what it's like to be a young mother. I became a mom 24 years ago. I know what it's like to struggle at a job that's barely making ends meet. I know what it's like to hate that job, but you got to do it because you chose a difficult path by getting pregnant before you were ready to be a mom. But you're hanging in there. I know what it's like to wear the same old clothes over and over because you can't afford to buy yourself anything. You're sacrificing it all so that your child may have. I know what it's like to be at odds with the other parent. And you're feeling like life is unfair and he's just living his best life while you're sitting over there struggling with you all's child. And I'm talking about to the point where you really want to just get up and move to a different state because what's the point? But you're fighting it because you know that deep down inside you want your child to have their dad. Having a dad is important. You value his position even though he's acting like an a-hole, right? I know what it's like to be grieving. I lost my mom at 23. My daughter was just 2. My mom was 41 when she passed. And I cannot tell you the amount of times while raising my daughter and during those difficult times that all I wanted was for my mom to be there so that I can go home and lay my burdens down. But I didn't have that choice. And my dad, unfortunately, had an addiction. He just wasn't able to be there for me. But I stuck it out. I held my head up and I kept grinding. I just kept going. And it's not easy. It's not an easy road. But this is why I created this channel, to go back and get the young women that were like I was, the young me, And if I had to do it all over again, sweetheart, 24 years ago, I'd have had my butt in somebody's therapist chair on their couch, laid out, crying and sobbing, because you got to be very careful who you telling your business to. Half the people don't care. The other half are happy you have the problems that you have. There's only a small percentage of people that truly have your back and your best interests at heart. And that's a fact. You can take that to the bank and cash it. Yep. For sure. So you get into therapy. This hustle culture of getting the bag, get into your mental health bag, your spiritual bag, your emotional bag. Yep. Because, maybe, just maybe God is trying to tell you that the blessing is going to come when you get your mind right and your mental health, you're mentally fit. He's going to show you how to go get the bag. And when you get the bag, you won't fumble it. You're not going to let some joker with slick words and all he has to offer is hard peen and bubble gum slither you on it, trick you out of your position. You're going to be spiritually in tune. You're going to have discernment and wisdom. You're going to have clarity over confusion. Yep. You're going to be able to see that BS a mile away and be like, no, thank you. You know, the stuff that you used to trip over, baby, you're going to be walking over it. Yep, it gets greater later. You know, when your kids grow up, I'm a living testimony. When your kids grow up, you're going to want to have that bond with them. You're not going to want your kids to be like, I'm leaving and never coming back, or I hate you. You know, and unfortunately, while raising kids as a single mom, first of all, none of us have gotten through childhood without being unscathed. We all have some sort of issues. Some are a lot more severe than others. Some people had a pretty decent childhood and they're all right, but there's something that's going on. None of us are perfect because there were never any perfect parents, right? But you don't want your kids feeling like they've been raised up in a toxic environment. You've got to break that generational curse, Ma. Heavy is the head of she that wears the crown, and you can be the generational curse breaker. Heal so that your children won't have to. Yep. Get into therapy. Truly, get into therapy. You know. Yep. If you have a church home, if you have insurance at your job, go check and see what benefits they have for counseling. You know, and if that's not your thing and you are pretty much adamant that you don't want to go talk about your problems, find some type of way to tap in, whether it's through meditation or working out or, self-help books, reading books, whatever it is, baby, you've got to pivot. And remember, it's more than just your physical health, because we know that how your brain functions is tied directly to your gut. But it's more than what you consume via your mouth orally, right? It's visually, and it's also what you listen to. So if you're on these social media sites and all you're seeing is negativity, gossiping about 50-50 relationships and stuff that really don't matter, that's not going to help you, you need to migrate on over to the ones that are talking about investing money. You know, how can you start a business? You know, what jobs are out there? I made my previous video is about jobs, ideal jobs for single moms. Yep. You need to start tapping into the things that are going to elevate you, that are going to propel you. Because a 50-50 relationship and whether or not black men want to date black women, that has nothing to do with the cost of tea in China, honey. Absolutely nada. Nothing. That's not going to help. You know. Yep. You know, and you have a church home, get involved with your church, start getting involved with nonprofit organizations, find something of your own. I've spoken on that in a previous video. You have to find something that you look forward to doing every day, whether it's start baking, learning how to bake if you don't do it already, sewing, book clubs, painting, anything, photography. Take up piano lessons, take up you a different language, go learn Spanish. Anything to get yourself in a position to where, you're getting your mind on the right things and you have healthy coping mechanisms. Yep. Get into therapy. But that's all I really wanted to touch on mental health, guys. Stay tuned, because I'm going to make a video in regards to the Black church and how I feel like there are some things that we could have done to really help each other out more. And it may have kind of mitigated a lot of the broken homes. And it's not going to be blaming the church, because the church is already under fire with a lot of these pastors. That's not my ministry, nor do I have the desire to ever put down my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. I have no place to judge. I have no hell or heaven to put anyone in, honey. But yeah, so stay tuned for that video. If you haven't already, like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me, how you guys are feeling. And to my single mommies, you got this, mamas. I love you guys. Till next time. Bye.